Thank y'all so much. That was wonderful. Give it up for our worship team. We are finishing up, actually, a series titled Prayer Set to Music, and we'll finish it up next week. But what we've been looking at for a number of months were a number of psalms. If you know anything about the Bible, or if you don't, there are 150 of these bad boys, and basically what they are prayers that people have prayed in the scriptures and wrote down, and then they set them to music. And so just as some of the songs that we were singing earlier were basically prayers at one point and just poems that people wrote to the Lord, and then someone put them to music and made them into a song of worship to the Lord. That's basically why we've been looking at these things and trying to figure out what it looks like to actually have prayer in the scriptures and what those things look like, and then what we can learn from those things as well. One of the things that we think is so important, we'll talk about it a little bit today, is prayer. It's one of the most difficult disciplines. And so if you're a Christian, which, by the way, if you're a Christian in this room and you're like, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, our team and the volunteers and all the rest of it, and just me personally, I guess I'll speak for myself, but I know this is true of everybody. I'm deeply encouraged by your faith. Okay, so especially in this day, this age, it has nothing to do with the message, but this day, this age, your school, your community, this culture is not friendly to Christians, and especially a social media culture, it's not friendly to Christians. And so the fact that you are one and pressing in, that does deep work in my heart. I want you to know that. That's noticed, and I'm not trying to celebrate you and then all of a sudden steal the celebration that you're going to receive in heaven. That's not what I'm trying to do. The Lord will still celebrate that and say, well done. But I just wanted you to know, you living out your faith and practicing that in a way that's visible for us to see, and then that's just tangibly visible in your countenance and your experience, that's amazing. So, it was difficult when I was in high school, pre-cell phone, pre-any kind of social media or anything. The challenge is now. And so, anyways, just really, really encouraged by you guys. But we're going to talk through Psalm 20 today, so I'm going to read it. This is Psalm 20. It says, this is David writing, and he says, "May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all your sacrifices and accept your burnt offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. May we shout for joy over your victory and lift up our banners in the name of our God. May the Lord grant all your requests. Now, this I know. The Lord gives victory to his anointed. He answers him from his heavenly sanctuary with victorious power of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise up and stand firm. Lord, give victory to the king. Answer us when we call." And the Hebrew actually reads, verse 9, the Hebrew actually reads, "Lord, give victory. The king will answer when we call." And that's the way that I'm going to be dealing. The rest of it's in the NIV, but I think the NIV misses something here. Because the Hebrew, and I think if you take it that way, it's fine. But the Hebrew actually, the actual reading of it is, "Lord, give victory. The king will answer when we call." And it's a very different shift that I think is very, very important. We'll talk about it at the end. But, Lord, give victory to the king. The king will answer when we call. This is the word of the Lord. When I was in high school, I was ninth grade. I was 135 pounds, and I was getting ready for football and kind of building up and starting to work out for the first time in my life. And I was relatively strong. And I remember one night I was hanging out at my friend Ricky's house, who lived 2 streets away from me. And so maybe 3 or 4 football fields away, but you could see my house and his house, and we could see them. And one night I was going home, probably something like tonight. My parents weren't there, but I was going home to an empty house, and it was dark, okay? And so 9th grade, I'm still, if someone were to ask, I'm not scared of the dark, but I was definitely still a little bit scared of the dark. And I lived out in the country, in the middle of nowhere, and so there was one street lamp that I'd pass by, and as soon as I passed by it, I would just take off running as fast as I could, because as soon as you were out of the light, I was anything can happen. I don't know. And so I was going from Ricky's front porch light, 4 football fields, front porch light to the medium light, trying to get to that one, and then and then doing it again, to the front door of my house where there was a light on and stuff. And then I'd get the key and look behind me it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So and if anybody were to see me doing that, I would act like I was rehearsing for a play or something. Oh yeah, it's just part of the drama, whatever. I'm a man, but I was terrified. And so I get to the door and I open it up. And what happened was when I opened the door, So unlock it, and y'all may have heard the story. I may have taught, I don't know, I share so many stories. But I open the door, like unlock it, open the door, and upstairs I hear a door go and close. And I was like, no! I don't even walk in. You know how like all the scary movies are like, hello? And then they die. Okay, I didn't do any of that. I was like, screw this noise. I'm out. I'm leaving. So I shut the door, and I bolt back to the medium light. And then I get back to Ricky's light. I'm like, there's someone in my house, man. I open the door, and another door shut, and I don't know what's happening. Like, my voice is getting higher and higher. And Ricky says what any good bro should say. It was like, well, let's go back with weapons. And I was like, that's what I was going to say too. We were going to go back with weapons. I'm not crying. This is a sweat from running. This is something else. So I was like, weapons. And so we go to his garage to get weapons. And there's not a lot there, if I'm honest. There's like a rake. And I grabbed, actually, I think he handed it to me. He handed me some Windex. And I was like, we're going to die. Like, this is how this ends. I'm going to squirt him with glass sprayer, and he's going to stab me with a fork. You know, just, anyway, so we get all this stuff, and he's like putting on shoulder pads from like football. I'm like, you think he's going to stab you in the shoulder? Like, what's wrong with you? So we have all this stuff on. I have on gardening gloves. I'm going to get him. I don't know what. I'm going to garden his face off. I have no idea. But we had all these different things, all these different weapons, and then on the way back, I couldn't show Ricky my plan of run to the light and flee from the darkness. I couldn't show him that. So I just walked like a man with my gardening gloves on, and we get to the house, we open the door, and we're like, we know you're in here! You know, and we're looking around, we go into all these places and find out that the door closed because when we opened it, the wind blew and it shut the door upstairs, and we were like, we're going to say we killed somebody, okay? Like, that's what we're gonna do. The reason for sharing that story was not to show how manly and awesome I am, because it doesn't happen. The reason for sharing that story is we had a way of preparing for battle. Like, this is how we're going to do it. Get your gardening gloves and Windex. Let's go. Like, that's what we thought. And I think in so many ways, like when you guys are experiencing something difficult or whatever, you're about to go into battle. Like, you do that as well. You prepare in some way. Like, if you know you had a bad grade and you have to sign something, it was a bad grade, you're rehearsing what to say. It's like, my teacher hates me, and you need to say it in such a way, you're like, my teacher, how do I say it to make it sound real and not like a lie that it is? How do I do that? And then, like, if you're going to a game or something like that, like you're practicing for something, if you're going to ask out a girl, you're like, come on, this is going to be okay. If you're going to, like, see a guy, like, you're preparing for whatever the battle is. Like, we do that to some extent. And the reason I say all that, this is a normal practice. We do this to get prepared for something, and that's basically what's happening here. This is a prayer of preparing for battle. That's what they're doing. This is how they chose to prepare for battle. The army, the reason it says in the first verse, like, may the Lord answer you when you're in distress. The idea is distress. We're here. It's now. We're in distress. And so what are we going to do to prepare for battle? And they would read this prayer, and David would say some of it. The army surrounding them, and so multitudes, thousands of people would say some of this prayer as well. And the high priest, the priestly thing, because God was on their side, he would say some stuff as well. But this is what they did. This is how they prepared for battle. This is what they went about. And they basically did three things that I want to talk about, and then how that shapes how we should prepare for battle as well, okay? So the first one that I wanted to point out that they actually do, and this is how they prepare for battle, is they pray for God's protection. You see it in verses 1 through 5. It says they're praying this over the king. So the king isn't praying this right now. It's just the army praying this over the king. And he's saying, may the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from his sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May you remember all your sacrifices, accept your burnt offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. May we shout for joy over your victory, being the victory of the Lord, and lift up our banners in the name of our God. May the Lord grant your requests. And so the group is praying for the king, and one of the things that I want you to notice here, and the things that's so important as they're praying for God's protection, they are basically saying, King, you're great, but you are completely useless unless God shows up and does something. Like, if you just go out there on your own with your sword and your strategy and your horse, you're going to fail bad. Like, they don't ever once pray for his strength. They don't pray for his like ability to strategize in the midst of the stress. Like, they don't do any of the, like, not his sword, not his armor, not for nothing. Like that. So if you think about, like, when you're being coached at something, like, hey, if you're going out to do something, like, remember the basics, like, remember the game plan, remember all this. They don't pray for any of that stuff. They're like, look, if you have the game plan and you got all the stuff and your sword's really mighty and stuff, nobody cares. They're going to kill you dead. The only thing that's going to work for you is that the Lord actually shows up and does something and fights for you. And so they prepare by praying for God's protection. The only thing they pray for, they say, may he answer you in your distress. Not may you keep your cool and fight well in your distress. May the name of God protect you, not your sword, not your armor. May your armor protect you. That makes a lot of sense. It's like, no. Actually, God's name is better than your sword. God's name is better than your armor. God's name is better than the rest of us. There's thousands of us. May God's name protect you, not us, because we can't do it. If he doesn't show up, it's basically for nothing. And it said the only thing they really pray for the king is like, hey, here's the one thing you should have done in the past. Like, may he accept your burnt offerings, which basically means, like, hopefully you did the thing that you were supposed to do and get the Lord's favor on your side. And may he look on you with favor and then answer you when you actually ask for help. May he protect you because you've actually been faithful to him. And so it's like, yeah, you did something, but it wasn't fighting. It wasn't anything like that. You just sought the favor of the Lord, and may he give that to you based on your offerings. Again, the whole point is you are useless unless God does something. And I have to imagine, now, if it's said over King David, he was pretty humble, but for like a proud king, for somebody who's like, hey man, I'm pretty good too, like maybe just throw me a bone, anything. Like I am king, like I'm pretty good with a sword. There's a reason I am where I am. Like for a proud king, this would be super humiliating. It would be something that's like, you would be reading it, like Boyd prayed for me earlier, and he was like, Lord, let none of his words come out of his mouth. And I was like, I mean, I got some good words. I mean, I got something, you know. No, but I mean, that idea, it's like, if you're proud, like this is super humiliating. Nothing is being said about you. It's basically saying you're worthless unless he shows up. You can do nothing on your own. And so for a proud king, this would be very, very difficult because it would feel like you have nothing in and of yourself. But the reason that David wrote it this way and the reason they're praying these particular things is they're trying to remind themselves, but mostly they're trying to remind the king of that. They're actually praying in a certain way to say, like, I need you to remember you are useless and helpless and completely inadequate unless the Lord actually does something. If his protection decides not to show up, if his hand isn't for you but against you, if he doesn't show up, we are done for, you're done for, this is never, ever going to work. And I think in so many ways we need to remember this as well. I think the Lord is constantly seeking to remind us that, like, love you, big fan, you're your own snowflake and all the rest of it, very special and fearfully made and all the things, and that's true. But I think he's constantly trying to remind us, and we need to have practices in this as well, constantly reminding us that we are completely dependent upon him. For any battle that we face, anything that we're dealing with in our lives, I think we eventually get to this space where we're like, I think I can do it on my own. I think I'm a Christian, I trust in the Lord, but I'm going to try and work this out on myself. I'll be able to do some of these things I'm dealing with, some of the battles I'm dealing with. I think I can do them on my own. And God is constantly trying to get us to a place to lead us to dependence, where we're going like, I can't do anything unless you actually show up. He wants us to have this particular way. He actually does this in Paul's life. If you know the New Testament at all, the Apostle Paul, this is why God gives him. He says, the Lord gave me a thorn in my side so that I wouldn't become conceited, so that I wouldn't be proud, but I'd stay humble and be dependent on his grace to be sufficient for me and not my own. This is why, for some of you, he's given you really, really difficult hardships right now. This is why, for some of you, your family life is really challenging. It's not just because it's challenging. That's one of the reasons for sure. But one of the things that he's trying to do is he's trying to press you and push you into a place of complete dependency. He wants to get you to the point in your life where you go, I can't do it. And he's like, perfect. That's exactly where I want you. Because that's the perfect point where you'll actually reach out for my help, my strength, instead of yours. And you'll experience what I can do and not what you can do. He's constantly trying to get you to a place of dependency, constantly trying to lead you into a space where you go, Lord, I can't do this. Great, let me. I'm really, really good at it. I'm really, really strong. And you're nice. I really like it. You know, it's pretty strong. But it's not as good as what I can do. Let me do it. And he's constantly trying to get us to that thing. Our hardships, our sufferings, all the different things. Why are these happening to me? They're forcing you ultimately to press into him. I love what Charles Spurgeon, a British preacher, says. He says, I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. This idea of like this horrible thing that slapped me and it ultimately threw me into a place of spiraling out and total chaos, but it landed me against the Rock of Ages, which is the name of the Lord. And he's like, I've just learned that in the midst of the difficulties that I'm facing, what the Lord is trying to do is he's ultimately trying to push me into a place of submission where I finally go, I can't do it. I'm dependent on you, God. If you don't act, I can't do anything. And in those moments, that's where he's able to go like, great, now I can move in this particular thing and show you that I'm sufficient, I'm more powerful, and I can do all of those different things. I think in so many ways, when we experience this idea that we can be independent, that we can do Christianity, that we can, deal with our family stuff. I have a plan. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deal with this issue I can do this on my own. Anytime we're forced or thought to be led to independence, that never comes from the Lord. He's never like, great, you don't need me anymore. You're kind of heavy to carry. Like he never does that. He's constantly leading you to dependence, never into independence. And so if you ever experience something that's leading you to go like, I think I can do this on my own, that comes from the enemy. It does not come from God. And I think what happens sometimes is our enemy, Satan, sometimes you're dealing with a spiritual struggle, you're dealing with a sin or something that you can't get over, and Satan is attacking you, and you're actually dealing with spiritual warfare, and something's really difficult going on in your family, something's really difficult going on in relationships, your friendships, and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, you start working through it, and you're trying to do something on your own, and then all of a sudden, Satan relents. And the reason he does that is not because he's kind, and he's trying to I'll just take my foot off his neck real fast. That's not why. He sees that you're trying to do it on your own, and he wants to relent and let you take care of it on your own, so that he can lead you to the place of going, ooh, I did it. I fixed it myself. And what he's trying to do, he's trying to lure you in to go, you didn't need God for that. You didn't need him for any of that. You did that on your own. You were able to defeat the battle. You were able to do that. And so many times he leads you to a place and then stops the struggle just so that you would think, I think I swept that away myself. So that ultimately when he comes back and you think, I'll get by it like I did last time. I'll do exactly what I did. I put in my earbuds, I talked to this, or I got angry in this way, and I did it this way. Here was my plan, here was my action. He tried to lead you to that place, and then finally he's like, now I got them. They think they're completely independent, and they're not dependent on him, and so now I can crush them. I led them to the place where I wanted them to go, stopped for a second, and then I swallowed them up. And all of this pain and all this conflict, he's wise and he's crafty, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to lead us to a place of independence. And so in prayer, realistically, we recognize our dependency. Prayer is naturally a thing where you're going, I can't do it, I think you can, so I'm going to close my eyes and talk to someone I can't see. It is an active thing of going, you can do it, I can't, that's why I'm asking you to help me, and that's what they're doing here. And in prayer, we actually do that. We actually come to him in dependency and say, I'm completely dependent on you. If you don't show up, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's what they're doing here. Samuel Chadwick, he's this really old guy who's dead now, but he was a pastor at one point. And he says this. He says, Satan dreads nothing but prayer. Satan, the enemy, dreads nothing but prayer. His one concern is to keep the saints, to keep Christians from praying. He fears nothing from prayerless studies, prayerless work, prayerless religion. He laughs at our toil. He mocks our wisdom, but he trembles when we pray. Trembles when we pray because he recognizes, he's like, I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of any of you. I can lead y'all and do all kinds of stuff and mess with your mind and get you to think all these kinds of things. I'm not worried about you. As soon as you turn your heart to prayer, I'm terrified of that man. I'm terrified of God. You can be swatted and dealt with. He can't be touched. I don't know what to do. He's terrified. And so anytime the people of God ever shift their brains and go, we cannot be independent, I'm completely dependent on you, God, he's like, well, crap. Now I'm done for. Now this can't work. He will crush me. He's more mighty than me. They can be stopped, but he can't. I can't seem to ever stop him. And so anytime we turn to prayer and go, God, I'm dependent on you, he trembles. And he's like, well, I think I lost here. I think I lost one. And so in so many ways, that's what they're doing here. They're reminding the king and saying, you're useless. No offense, we like you. You are our king. Very nice. Really nice person you are. But you're useless unless he shows up. We need you, God. We need you to show up because if you don't, it's over. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that as well. In the midst of any battle, in the midst of our current struggle, in the midst of every single day when you step out into the world of spiritual warfare, this is necessary for you to understand that you are useless and you've never done it on your own. If you've ever experienced victory, it's because the Lord did that for you, not because you did it for yourself. The second thing that they do is they root themselves in the truth. The psalm switches here just real fast in verse 6. And King David actually begins speaking. The king, it was written for kings to say this particular portion of it. And this is what it shifts. So the army's talking, and now in verse 6, the king speaks, and he says, now, this I know. The Lord gives victory to his anointed, and he answers him from his heavenly sanctuary with victorious power of his right hand. Again, the king speaks here, and he says, I have assurance of victory. I know I'm going to win. And the reason he knows he's going to win, and the reason he knows he's going to experience victory is because he's rooted himself in the truth of what God has already said and what he's already promised. And this is why we want you to read the Bible. But the king knows that in Israel, at this particular time, during this particular season of the monarchy and kings and stuff, God chose the king. It was always God doing the choosing. He's choosing the king. And David, for a fact, knew he chose me. He anointed me king over Israel. He promised then to take care of me. He promised to protect me. He promised to provide for me. He promised that no army would defeat me because I'm his anointed, and he's going to make sure I'm king. And so David he goes like, I know this. I know this because I've rooted myself in the truth. And even though I'm looking at something that's terrifying and fearful, and they're bigger and stronger and mightier than we are, and I don't know what else to do, and they surround us on every side, I just know. I don't know how it's going to happen, but here's what I know. He's going to give victory to me because he's anointed me king. He's promised that he's going to do it, and he's faithful to his promises. This, again, is why we want you to read the scriptures. If you don't know and have this confidence and this assurance in the midst of your struggles, in the midst of your trials, in the midst of the things that you're dealing with, if you're not able to say that he is for me, that he's going to grant me victory, that he's, even in the midst of the trials and the struggles and the circumstances that I wished I didn't have, even in the midst of that he's for me, that he's with me, he's carrying me through it, he's going to sustain me through it, and he's going to grant me victory, not if not in this life, then the one to come. We need to understand these things, and the only way to do that is to actually root ourselves in the scriptures. But David has the assurance that the battle will belong to him because it ultimately belongs to the Lord. He will experience victory because the Lord doesn't lose. And so he knows that for a fact. Third thing that they do, and I love this. This is probably my favorite one. But they chant a liturgy of defiance. They chant a liturgy of defiance. A lot of words there. But one, liturgy, is basically a script that you repeat for certain times. And this whole prayer was basically a liturgy for war. We need to, say this before we go into battle. But what the army does here in verses 7 and 8, they actually chant something over and over. And if you're ever wondering, like, liturgy, where have I experienced it before? If you come to Living Hope, we do it for baptisms. We say the same thing at baptisms. For the Lord's Supper, we say the same things over and over. Pastor David does it with a call to worship, and he reads something, and then we respond in a certain way. It's just a script for getting something into our hearts and getting something into our minds and down into our hearts. And so that's what they're doing here. They're chanting a liturgy, just a short two-liner, a liturgy of defiance. And they're just shouting against everything else that they'll see. So this is what it says in verses 7. A liturgy of defiance. They say, the army, so King David just spoke, now the army talks again and says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise up and stand firm. And they're just chanting this, and they're chanting this. And every time they go into battle, they have to say this thing. Some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They're going to fall, and we're going to rise and stand firm. Chanting a liturgy of defiance. And here's why they did that. They knew that when they got to the battle line, and it's drawn out, they roll up without chariots and with very few horses. They knew that when they rolled up, they would see armies that are bigger and stronger and more technologically advanced than they are. They're going to have chariots. They're going to have really fast horses. They just knew, I'm going to get to a place where I go, wow, it really doesn't look like we're going to win. It looks like they're stronger, bigger, and more advanced than we are. It looks like we're going to lose. They just knew that. And so they had this liturgy of defiance where it's like, even though what I'm seeing looks a certain way, I need a liturgy of defiance, something telling me and telling my soul, I need to be defiant against whatever I see in my brain, what it looks like versus how it's actually going to play out. And so they're reminding themselves, they're like, oh yeah, what was that thing I said again? As soon as they see the chariots and the horses, they're like, oh yeah, they're trusting in chariots and horses. That's okay. They're trusting in chariots. That's the only might they know. That's the only strength they have. But I actually know the mighty one. I actually know the king over all kings. I know that person. They trust in chariots. They trust in horses. I'm not surprised to see them. That's all they got. But we have God on our side, and he's going to crush them. They're going to fall, and we're going to rise and stand firm. And so they're just repeating this over and over to themselves, trying to stir their faith, build their faith, and place it on something so that when they face opposition that makes them look scary and makes them think something different, they're defiant against the difference. And they're going like, here's what the world is telling me, and yet I'm defiant against that. I will not believe that. I will actually stand in faith as opposed to standing in fear, defiant against those things. And there's this liturgy just stirs that into them. And I think that we need something like this. We need a liturgy of defiance. You need some defiant liturgy just for your own world. As a Christian, you need something that when you step into your world, that you're able to look around and see certain things and then be able to look at it and say, like, I need to preach something into my heart and into my soul because what I see tells me one thing, but I need something true that's actually going in, that I'm repeating over and over so that it sinks down deep into my soul, that it stirs my faith again. And so we actually do this. I mean, if you think about it, we wouldn't call it a liturgy of defiance. I'm going to give you a couple here in a second. But we do actually do this to some extent. Like, you ever been working out, and then all of a sudden you're like, 5 more, I'm almost just 5 more. And then it's like 4 more, 3 more. And then all of a sudden you're done. Like, you ever been running, and you're like, just one more lap. And you're telling yourself that. Anybody understand that experience? Or if you're like if you haven't seen someone in a long time, and you're dying to see them, and you're like, just 2 more weeks. 2 more. Some of you have senioritis, and you're doing that now. You're like, it's like 3 more months, and I'm almost done. Like you're basically telling yourself, reminding yourself of a truth, because what it feels like is, I don't think I can make it. And reminding yourself of that truth ultimately spurs you on to go, well, it's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more. That's what they're doing here. They're just saying, look, it doesn't look like we're going to win, but they're trusting in chariots. They're trusting in horses. We trust in the name of the Lord. They're going to fall. We're going to rise. Okay, I got it. And they're just saying that to themselves because it's going to look really, really scary once they draw the battle lines. And they know that they need something to stir their faith. And so we need that as well. So a liturgy of defiance for us. I'm just going to give you a couple. It's actually quite a few. But I want you to ultimately come up with your own. Yeah, quite a few. Here's a couple. It's just a few. Some trust in their fears to keep them safe, but I trust in the Lord to protect me. Some trust in their bodies, their promiscuity to get them love, but I trust that the Lord will provide the right person for me, who will not use me for my body, but love me as Jesus does. Some trust in social media, scandalous posts to feel worthy and important, but I trust that I have been carefully made exactly the way that He wanted me to be. My worth comes from what He says about me and not others. Some trust in their own talents and sports to make them valuable. They give their lives to it, but I trust that my value comes from God, who displayed my worth in sending His Son to die on my behalf so that He could know me. That's my worth. Some trust in their anger and hatred to shield them from pain, but I trust in forgiving those who have wronged me to heal painful relationships, because that's exactly what Jesus has done for me. Some trust in living their own truth in order to feel happy, but I trust in the truth that true joy comes from denying myself, taking up my cross, and following Jesus. It's not me living my own truth, but actually following Jesus. Some trust in their ability to control things to avoid suffering, but I trust that what the Lord leads me to, He will also carry me through. Some trust in doing good to make God love them, but I trust in the sacrifice of Jesus that proves He loved me while I was His enemy. Some trust in a feeling that God is near them. I trust that He will never leave me nor forsake me at any time, regardless of how I feel. Some people trust their own understanding of what is right and what is wrong, and I trust that in the Lord's word, even when I struggle to understand His ways at times. We need defiant liturgy in our souls and in our hearts. We need one for whatever you're dealing with. You need something written down, something there, so that you can just say it. It's 2 lines, it's done. They're trusting in this, but I don't trust in that, because it's so easy. And it was so easy for the army to look out and see the chariots and see the horses and be like, man, why don't we have that? How are we ever going to win this? And they needed something to remind themselves of the truth and to stir them once again to faith and go like, oh yeah, of course they trust in that. They got nothing else. All their gods are made of wood and stone and rock. Those gods can't even lift themselves. Like, my God created the wood, the stone, the rock. Like, they trust in things that were man-made. My God made the man who made the thing. Like, that's who I trust in. Like, they needed to just remind themselves, and in our culture right now, specifically, especially in y'all's age and all the rest of it, you need something when you look out there and go, look, they seem to be winning. Their life seems to be going better than mine, but they're trusting in that. But I trust in the name of the Lord my God. I trust in the truth of the Scriptures. I trust in those things. That seems to be successful. That seems like it's going to work, but I know that it's not, because victory ultimately belongs to Jesus, and Jesus says this is the way the victory comes about. We need defiant liturgy. And so my encouragement to you would be to actually create one for yourself. And it's not hard. Go to the Scriptures. When you're like, I don't think that I can go to Jesus right now. Like, some trust that I have to live this perfect life and do all this stuff. And it's like, no. Some trust in that. But I trust that Jesus lived the perfect life, and He died the death that I was supposed to die, so that ultimately I can experience the life that He has for me. He earned a victory so that I could experience His victory, not because I'm great or anything like that. And I think so often, turning to prayer in the same way. I should probably, some trust in doing their own thing and not praying, and I'm just going to do this on my own. I'm just going to try and do it on my own. But I trust that in prayer that we actually convene the very court of heaven, and we go before God with our prayers and actually ask him to do things that we can't do on our own. Some trust in their own strength, but I trust in the fact that I'm weak, and yet when I glorify in my weaknesses and say, God, I'm weak, I can't do it, then that's when your strength actually steps in. We need defiant liturgy in our lives. Worship team, y'all can come on up. I want to close by looking at verse 9. I told y'all that I was going to not do the NIV version, but the Hebrew, the way that it reads. But I want to close by looking at this last verse. And I'd love for this to be a prayer for you as well. I want you to have defiant liturgy. But I'd love for this to be a prayer. He says, Lord, give victory. And we don't know if it's the king or if it's everybody at this time or the high priest. We don't know exactly who it is, but Lord, give victory. And then it says, the king will answer us when we call. And so the idea is probably that it's all of them, because it's saying we. They're all shouting this one thing, Lord, give victory. And then they recognize there's a king in heaven who's going to answer us when we call. I think it's really interesting that David understood and that army was supposed to understand. Yes, King David is king, but there is someone greater than him. There's an actual king who came. There's an actual king who's there for us. There's an actual king who's in charge of it. And the battle is just his. And so I think in so many ways, he understands that the battle belongs to him, and he trusted in him that he could still be ultimately under his protection because he's the actual king. David's like, I'm a human king, but there's someone who actually rules and reigns from on high. He owns the earth. He made it. He owns the heavens. He created them. He is actually king of the universe. Like heaven and earth belong to him. He rules and reigns those things. He is the true king, and he will answer us when we call, and he will give us victory because he owns these things. And I think in so many ways, this is what Jesus did on the cross. This is how he was actually seeking to fight for us, actually seeking to work for us, fighting for us, saving us from our enemy, crushing the head of Satan so that we could actually have the victory. God sent the king, and the king did answer, and he sent him and answered by sending his son ultimately to take care of the biggest battle that we would ever face in our entire lives, our sin. How do I unchain from chains that are invisible? How do I unlock these things that I can't even see? How do I change my heart? I can barely change my clothes. Like, how do I do this? And Jesus is like, I'll take care of all of that. I will fight the battle that you didn't even know about, and I will defeat the enemy that you were unaware of. I will win a victory that you didn't even know you needed to win. I will do those things. And so in your life now, in your world now, whatever you're dealing with now, that this would be our prayer, that you would understand that if he took care of your greatest enemy ever, these things that you're dealing with here and now, in this world, and whatever you're dealing with, suffering, hardship, things with your family, things with your friendships, things with your mind and your heart and all those different things, that's a big issue for you. And I know that it's hard, and I know it's a hardship. But these things up here, the sin that you couldn't take care of, this was your biggest need, this biggest battle, and he won that one for you. And so if he won the biggest one, he can definitely take care of these as well. So pray this, Lord, give victory. Give victory. King Jesus, would you answer me when I call? Let me pray. Father, Lord, would you remind us again of our dependency on you? Thank you that you are pursuing us with that by allowing us to go through hardships, trying to get us to finally throw our hands up and say, I can't do it, God, you're going to have to. God, I pray that we would do that in faith. I pray that we would finally turn to you and be dependent on you, not trying to do it ourselves. God, forgive us where we've trusted in other things, chariots and horses, our bodies or our minds or our athletic ability or whatever, anything else to give us what we're looking for. Our ability to party and to drink more than the other, smoke more than the other, like our ability to get the girl, to get the guy, to get the sex, to get the things, like, God, forgive us when we trust in those things to be what you're actually trying to give us. Help us to turn from those things and to turn to you. God, I pray for the Christians in this room that they would be encouraged, that in a world that is seeking to tell them, trust in the chariots, trust in the horses, encourage them to continue to trust in you. They're like, that's fine. I know that y'all do that, but I trust in the name of the Lord my God. I'm going to stand firm here because you will fall, but I will rise up and stand firm. God, help us with that. Help us to sing in your victory, trusting that you're the king and the victory belongs to you and the battle belongs to you and you will actually do that for us. Help us to give those things to you. In Jesus' name, amen.